Next up, we have a fireside chat on 5G titled Ensuring the Future of 5G is Secure. And I'd like to welcome on stage once again Richard, who is the Director of Security Technology and Strategy, EMEA with Akamai Technologies. And I would also like to welcome on stage our moderator for this session, Annamária, who is Associate Researcher on Cybersecurity Strategy and Policy with the Óbuda University. Stage is yours.
In this fireside, we should be just chatting a bit about 5G security. And I would like to let the audience know that it's going to be just a more casual discussion, and if anyone has questions during the conversation or in the end, you should be just feel free to ask the questions. So, Richard, let's just start about talking, why is 5G security important in your opinion?
I think 5G is going to become a ubiquitous method of connectivity. The ability for a large amount of, or increased volume, increased traffic, the ability to have thousands of devices per transmitter compared to what it used to be like with 4G and 3G, has meant we're going to end up with a plethora, a multitude more endpoints which need to be protected. The inherent security is just the same as what it needs to be with 4G, with 3G, in terms of the endpoints need to be protected. It's just going to be, there's going to be so many more opportunities. And as I talked about in the presentation earlier, our need and our passion for IoT devices, for smart fridges, smart TVs, smart Hoovers, and whatever, means that these network-enabled or SIM-enabled devices are only going to become more and more popular, more and more prevalent, and we won't really have much control on the level of security that is done on those devices. So make sure that the security for the 5G is just as important as it was for 4G. It's just going to be much more.
Yes, you're so right. People are getting just so much in love with these gadgets, these smart devices you mentioned, not even mentioning the wearable devices, right? And the security question there still stands. When we talk about 5G, and just did a very quick research on the internet, everybody wants to know, and I think in companies in the industry as well, what are the risks compared to 3G and 4G security? You've been in this industry for more than 20 years, so you saw 3G technologies, 4G technologies. So what is the new thing in here?
Well, I think sort of same as before really is that yes, there are additional functionality that you can get from operators within the 5G space. Realistically, when you had 3G and 4G, you just had the data provision. But now with 5G, you do get additional interfaces which you can ask operators for, such as quality of service and things like that. But realistically, with 5G, it's the same as it was with 4G in terms of you have your endpoints. So is it your mobile phone? Is it your smart device? Is it a pump on an oil rig in the middle of the desert? Everything is going to be, whether it's 4G connected or 5G connected, the risk is still going to be there. It's the same as what it was with 4G. There's no inherent change there. It's just going to be the volume of devices. And I think that what organizations will look to do is they'll look to leverage the ubiquity of 5G and the ability to have thousands and thousands of devices per transmitter, because it gives them an opportunity to connect lots and lots of devices they wouldn't normally connect. A lot of old operational technology now becomes internet connected, and that's where that overlap between IT and OT is where the real risk, but that's what 5G will enable, but it also will create more of a risk.
Yes, you're so right. What is in such an opportunity to connect so many devices, we can't even imagine a few years before that it will be an opportunity. Now it's also a risk. And are there any other risks you see regarding this technology?
Well, I think, if you look at your mobile phone, your mobile phone is going to be using 5G, but if you've got an Apple or an Android, you've got like knock security on it. So you've got you know your phone's going to be pretty secure, irrespective of whether you're using 4G or 5G, because there's an operating system with a lot of software in there ensuring the integrity of your device. But when you're using something that's maybe a controller on a module sensing or detection module on a digger or on a bus, or you're looking at the status of a valve or something like that, that's going to be pretty low tech. You know, you're not going to stick an iOS device in every single 5G transmitter you have, because it's just not going to be effective. Plus, it has to be ultra low latency. Plus, it has to be able to support the massive amount of devices. And you know, you can't have an iOS device because you can't keep charging it. You know, your iPhone needs charging twice a day. You know, these devices need to be able to run for years on a single charge. So therefore, the level of technology that you can put onto the device is going to be relatively small, and therefore, how do you protect the endpoint becomes a challenge when it's outside of that sort of typical iOS, Android handset modality.
Yes, that's very true. Part of protecting endpoints. In the previous panel, we talked about just slightly about endpoint protection, but this brings our attention to BIOD. Bring your own device. I read in Akamai's blog that currently over 650 million corporate-owned mobile and IoT devices used all over the world. So what do we do with these devices, these mobile devices? How to protect our employees and their devices? This is a huge risk.
Yeah, there's several things to unpack in that. I think with bring your own device, 5-10 years ago, bring your own device was seen as a way of organizations reducing the number of devices that people had and saving on cost. You know, it meant that they could, you know, everybody has a mobile phone. Why do they have to have two? Why do they have to have a corporate device and the home device? Especially when the home device frequently was more powerful than the one the corporates would give them. The problem was then is that you went from having one or two SKUs that you knew about to a gazillion different types of devices. And it was very difficult to maintain any sort of understanding about the security posture of all of those individual devices. I think now people are moving back away from bring your own devices as it's more of a security risk. But again, it comes down to the connectivity. When it's connecting, those devices are connecting out to the internet. When they're connecting out to the cell towers, when they're communicating, how do you secure that? If you do want to go down the bring your own device route, you're going to either do one or two things. You've either got to put endpoint controls on the mobile device such that you can segment it into a work component and a personal component, or you're going to have to load additional controls onto the device to be able to say, right, I can do remote wipe and remote secure, but there's still going to be an element of risk in that. So I think, or you can basically say, okay, let's put the smarts, the security component, in the cell tower, as part of the mobile network, and get the mobile network to be able to do the security. So as soon as it connects to the cell tower, it's then communicating with an infrastructure that's able to do WAF, IDS, IPS, connecting to your home network, connecting to your corporation's network, and be able to do all that, but centrally managed. I think that's when your BYOD device concept begins to work.
Yes, can you a bit elaborate on this part? What can we do? These three things what you mentioned. What do you think, which one would be the best? Like you said, segmenting.
I think most organizations who have high risk appetite, sort of a low risk appetite, i.e. they want to minimize risk as much as possible, will move away from the BYOD and have their own devices, because then they can mandate exactly what goes onto the device. They know what's on there, what cannot be put onto that. I think that's going to be the most secure way of doing it. Organizations that do want to go down BYOD, I think they will have to put some endpoint controls onto it, but I think that there's a growing trend now we can put the smarts, the clever stuff, in the mobile operators and get the mobile operators to be able to deliver some of those services. And that way you get at the best of both worlds.
Yes, I do agree with you. I think maybe companies, they do have to draw back a little bit from the BIOD. But who is the one who would make such kind of decisions or policies, or who is responsible for it? Either just these policies or in general, we're talking before 5G, cybersecurity standards. We feel that there's always such a confusion, or some standards or policies are completely incohesive with each other.
Yeah, I think with, I come over it from a cybersecurity background as opposed to a sort of a telco background. And in cybersecurity, there's several sort of standards. You know, you've got things like NIST, for example, are very good at sort of identifying all the types of and vectors of attack and how you can best place and mitigate them and quantify the risk to your business. I think when you're looking at things like 5G, fundamentally it's connectivity. It's, you know, we're going to have Wi-Fi 6 come along soon, which is going to be offering a similar but not quite the same level of control and availability. But it's fundamentally a method of connectivity. You have an endpoint that's connecting out to the internet, to your local business or whatever. And because you have that endpoint, you need to be able to protect it. And you can either protect it by putting something on the device, but as we talked about, a lot of 5G devices are not going to be capable of running advanced security stacks. They're going to be very low, they're designed to run on a battery for 10 years. They're going to be very low, you know, must have very low latency, so you can't have every single request going through a huge tech stack. So you want to be able to do that without compromising on the fundamental benefits that you get from 5G, that ultra low latency, that massive machine interaction, and the number of machines per node.
Yeah, it's true. It should be, as you mentioned, connectivity. And also I believe, like in policy making, it should be connectivity and cooperation. There's so many governments should work together with international associations in finding new policies and standards in this region, in Europe, in the States, and try to bring up one more unified solution. At least even though if the policies, nation states have their own right to accept their own policies, but at least for the gadgets, what we use, there should be some unified technology in the background.
Yeah, it would be nice.
Yes,
I think we're a long way away from that. I mean,
I agree.
It's you know, it's just like you provide the roads, and anything you got the road, from a bicycle to a Humvee, and which one are you more protected in? And it's a question of what you want to take onto that road. I think that there are lots of security standards that are being placed in various geos, and also from different aspects in terms of privacy with things like the GDPR, but you've also got generic sort of cybersecurity standards which organizations need to be adherent to. And things like GDPR is a very good indicator, because it basically says you really should be looking after this. And I think when people found GDPR as being an onerous task, they actually realized that if they thought it was an onerous task, then they probably weren't looking after the data very well in the first place. People who were looking after the data in the first place said, okay, yeah, we've got this, because we realized how valuable that was. You know, we've just heard about, you know, potentially TikTok was breached with like billions and billions of usernames and passwords compromised. When you realize about the level of integrity you need to put around databases of that size, that's when you really need to think about the connectivity, who's connecting in from all of those IoT devices. One IoT device gets compromised, and realistically, most of these IoT devices are on the open internet. Yes. That's the thing. When you've got your smart detector in a bus or whatever, it's connected to an MNO, therefore it has an IP address normally on the open internet. And because of that, it can be easily compromised. I mean, I'm sure everybody's seen examples of digital road signage that gets compromised and somebody puts in some smart comment or joke or whatever, because it's just running on a SIM that's connected to the internet. And what we need to try and do is work with the MNOs to put in the technology and the smarts to be able to say, as soon as that SIM-enabled device connects to the cell tower, they're put on to an ASN that is able to provide secure connectivity, either, ideally a private IP, but also, WAF, IDS, IPS, secure connectivity into the origin and stuff like that.
Yes, you're right. And so, I'm so glad you mentioned also the GDPR. I think it all falls back into the privacy by design, or security by design concept, but every single company, or even just normal end users, have to keep in mind when they try to implement anything in their household, in their system. First question, do I need it? If I need it, how do I secure it?
Well, I think it's very different between a consumer point of view and an enterprise perspective. I think from an enterprise perspective, if you have anything that's 5G enabled by default, you need to understand what networks that's connecting to, and what, is it connect? Do you have any? Is it running on VPNs? Is it? What connectivity is there? What is it? What's it communicating? Is it communicating out to the internet? Is it broadcasting information as part of an OT network? How are you gathering that information, and what is that sort of mesh network looking like? And where we have spoken to a lot of organizations, we're able to work with the MNOs to essentially push down a secure cloud environment that works at the cell tower. So as soon as you connect to the cell tower, whether you're a mobile phone or you're an emissions detector on a bus or you're a smart motorway sign, that connects into, as soon as it hits the cell tower gives an APN, which gives you on a secure network, which basically means there's going to be no internal connections into that because it's going to have a private IP address. And that means it's not visible on the open internet. And that inherently gives you a degree of security. And then we can put other layers of security, such as we talked about in terms of protecting the requests that it makes. We can put and allow lists and denied lists, or where it can access on the internet, or where it can access within the corporate. And basically getting back down to the things about least privilege. What's the minimum amount of connectivity it needs to have to be able to do its job? Generally now with a 5G device, we put it on, we connect it in, and that's it. It's got all access. It's very hard to lock everything down.
Yeah, everything you mentioned, these are very good proactive measures that an enterprise can take. And also if you take it into state viewpoint, if not just an enterprise viewpoint, it could be also a very good proactive step in 5G to ensure that they have a multi-vendor strategy. So they are not depending on just only one vendor if they compromise, but maybe they have multiple vendors, a variety to choose from.
Yeah, having, in terms of 5G support, or you're always going to go to multiple different vendors for whether it's an IoT device or whether it's your mobile phone. I think with the MNOs, you can also go and ensure that it's what is the carrier, what is the cell tower, what APN is that going to broadcast down to? So it depends. You can have multiple different SIMs, or multiple SIMs from multiple different providers connecting into the cell tower, and then it's just getting the cell tower to broadcast the correct APN down. And that's fairly a straightforward process. So that doesn't leave you at just tied into one particular MNO to provide that. But security in depth has always been a fundamental security design. I work with lots of financial institutions all around EMEA, and most of them will have a cloud WAF in place, but they'll also have an on-prem WAF as well, from a different vendor. A lot of organizations will have Juniper switches and Cisco switches. They'll always make sure they have a different layer in there so they can give that inherent sort of double layer of protection. So if somebody finds a vulnerability in one, they're not going to get through the next one.
It's always very good to have different protections, right? If anyone has a question about the topic of 5G we talk about, let's hear your questions. Can we have a microphone?
Hi, my name is Amr Mutwalli from Mohammed Medical Corporation. So my question is not really about the 5G, but it's more about the satellite internet, which is, I think, right now is imminent to be used in many countries. And cybersecurity, it was being challenging for the normal internet. As an example, when cryptocurrency has been initiated, it comes with a blockchain, but we've never seen any cybersecurity protocol for the satellite. It has been always a challenge. Imagine if today I have an access for internet using a satellite like Starlink satellite internet. What exactly are the challenges? And are you guys ready for something like that? I think, yes, we are still initial stage, but at some point this will be bomb out.
I think the keynote that's going to happen this afternoon from Apple is going to be interesting because I think they're talking about doing iMessage over satellite link. Yeah. So I think that's going to be an indicator of things to come. Yes, it is going to sort of change the dynamic slightly, but again, it's a communication platform. It's in a way, it's a bit like layer one. Is it physical? Is it 5G? Is it satellite? You're still going to have an internet breakout at some point. You're still going to have connectivity, and it's a question of if they're still using TCP/IP, then they're still going to be the same. It's how far up the stack are we going on this? And if the satellite connectivity still has to come out at some place. I mean, we've had satcoms for internet for years through things like Inmarsat. I used to work with them many years ago. But they still had their marine satellites over the Indian Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, but they then had to come down to Goodhilly in Australia or wherever in Europe and then go out onto the open internet. So you've still got that inherent risk. It's still a TCP/IP link. So it will be interesting. I think the paradigm will change a little bit. It's interesting to see how it will work. I mean, we work at the edge of the internet, and if the edge of the internet happens to be out in space, then we'll go there with it.
Okay.
And just to answer that part of your question you mentioned about the strategies, we don't really have much planned. As far as I know, ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, they do work on this part, the satellite and 5G standards, and 3GPP. They also working on it since 2020. As I think you mentioned it, Richard, before that. We feel that before COVID, everything stopped in these past 2 years, being just a whirlwind. But they do work on some standards, and also the United States government, they gave a very long policy recommendations on satellites. So there are a few initiatives already, but nothing implementable yet. If there is no other questions, I do have some personal questions to you, Richard, since we're just chatting.
Well, bunks is fire here.
Yes, we mentioned the fire. I'd like to get to know just your opinion on what do you foresee in the future of the cybersecurity industry?
Oh, gosh, looking into my crystal ball. I'd love to be able to say what's going to be happening in 5 years' time, because I'm probably going to set my own company up to solve it. I think one thing we've seen over the last few years is the speed of and adoption of change. I think we had one conversation on the panel session was about AI and how that's going to be used. And I think AI is going to be, if it's implemented and effectively used as an offensive and a defensive tool, is going to be very, very powerful. The only problem is it'll become to a level where we won't be able to understand what's happening, and that's the danger. When AI becomes less human constrained, because at the moment AI is largely used in a managed environment. It does a certain bit of compute, and then you have a human being managing in that, and that guides their decisions. But as soon as we start letting it become just looking purely at the data without any human biases overriding that or human management interaction, then when it starts to make decisions, we're not going to be able to understand why, because it'll just made that decision by itself. That's going to be interesting when we have to start nitpicking and backtracking to try and figure out why certain decisions were made, why certain things were blocked. So I think that's going to be the next big challenge is how we control the measure the efficacy of AI.
Right. I do think that we are, at the same time, very excited about AI and similarly frightened about the challenges it will bring us. I completely agree with you on that. And if there is some newbies in this industry or someone who will be just starting in the cybersecurity field, what would be your advice to those?
I think don't try and be the SOC analyst just and having all the skills at once. Cybersecurity is a massive industry. It's a massive industry, and people have come to it from all sorts of different walks of life. I mean, I joined doing computing. My first job in IT was I was a hardware engineer. I used to fix hard disk drives that were the size of a bus, sort of thing, and going out with soldering iron voltmeters and oscilloscopes. And you just pick up things and you learn things. And when I started out, information security was a tiny subsection of what it was today. Now information security is huge. There are so many disciplines, so many areas. I think once you've understood the basic principles of information technology, you do the entry-level courses. That gives you the basics, because I think a lot of it is, if you have the aptitude to learn, once you're inside an organization and you work with an organization that realizes that potential, that's when you get the value. I don't think there's one qualification that says, oh yes, well you're immediately a cybersecurity expert coming in and you'll be at the top level. I think it's one of those things, it's getting the basics right and then learning on the job is the best way to do it. But you need to find the companies that are going to give you that trust.
Yes,
We have a good graduate intake program, by the way.
Oh, so if anyone wants to start, then they should just look for you and you will give them good counseling. I think Davor mentioned earlier in the panel that yes, it shouldn't be just all about focusing one degree or one certification, achieving it, but it should be a continuous development. And lastly, is there anything, a change, what you would be happy to see in the cybersecurity industry, what you think we should modify or change?
I think more focus needs to be done on the users. The user is often seen as the biggest and most vulnerable part of any organization. And sometimes they are chastised if they click on a link. Sometimes we say, well, we've given them half an hour of information security training this year, so therefore they should be able to spot any known problem. But also understand the value of the data that those users have access to. Because if they're not happy, it's very easy for them to be approached by cyber criminals, and will go in for either social engineering, or straight up they will go up and offer them money. And so they'll say, if you've got a fairly good role at a fairly prominent organization, they'll come up to you and say, we'll give you £20,000 for your credits.
Yes,
Or 50,000 QATAR'S. Understanding what access your users have access to, what is their motivation, what is their drivers, are they happy? In all aspects, information security is not necessarily about the ones and zeros, it's about the human beings. And that's the focus we need to put on.
it's true. When we talk about zero trust, let's trust in our employees and make sure that they're loyal to us. I really enjoyed that conversation. I really hope that also the audience learned something. And I'm sure in the networking lunch we'll be able to continue.
Definitely. Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed it.
Thank you.